Welcome to the deep dive. We are really thrilled you decided to join us today.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in.
If you're someone who is just insanely curious about the world, but you occasionally feel, I know I do, entirely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of hot takes and definitive conclusions being thrown at you constantly, you have definitely found the right place to be.
Absolutely. It gets to be a lot.
It really does. So today, our mission is to unpack a profoundly personal reflection. We're looking at aging, the sheer convenience of the car sitting right there in our driveways, and the subtle, almost invisible ways that technology, specifically artificial intelligence, is quietly changing the options available in our daily lives.
What's fascinating here is the explicit premise of the source material we're working with today. The notes come from Tommy Yoshida, who is known in Japan as Tsutomu Yoshida.
Right.
And the excerpt we're looking at is beautifully titled, When Driving is Convenient, Yet Something Pauses. It's actually part of a much larger series he wrote called AI as a Transitional Phase. And Yoshida tells us right up front what this project is not.
Which is so refreshing.
Exactly. He makes it abundantly clear he isn't trying to evaluate AI's ultimate impact on humanity. He isn't writing a how-to guide. And most importantly, he refuses to reach any firm conclusions.
Which, that feels almost radical in today's media landscape. Every single article you read about AI seems determined to convince you that it will either, bring about a utopian paradise or completely destroy society by next Tuesday.
Right. There is no middle ground anymore.
Yeah. But Yoshida is just sitting in the middle, treating this as a transitional phase.
He operates under this assumption that not every single thought needs to be neatly wrapped up with a bow. We're allowed to just sit with the transition, just observing the unfinished thoughts and those paused questions out in the open.
It's a really liberating way to look at it, but before we really get into Yoshida's story, we do need to give you a quick heads up about the language and the source material itself.
Yeah, this is a crucial detail. Yoshida makes a very specific point about the translation of his audio into English. He intentionally preserved a certain level of awkwardness.
Awkwardness.
Yeah, he didn't want the translation smoothed over by, like, a brilliant copy editor to make it sound like perfect native English. He leaves that slight friction intact on purpose.
Oh, to observe how the language and the technology interact.
Exactly, how language, technology, and human judgment interact during periods of rapid change. When you read or hear his translated words, that tiny bit of discomfort forces you to slow down. You have to grapple with the concepts rather than just skimming past them.
It's a feature, not a bug.
Perfectly said.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's get into the actual story Yoshida shares, because the catalyst for this entire reflection is a very specific, very personal milestone. When he turned 60 years old, he made what seemed like a small decision, but it ended up being highly impactful.
He decided not to renew his driver's license.
Right. Which sounds simple, but we really need to look at the cultural context of that decision.
We do. In Japan, there is a very specific, highly publicized concept called henu. Right. Which translates to the voluntary return of a driver's license by the elderly. And it is often treated as this major civic event. You actually go down to the police station, you officially surrender the card, and sometimes you even get a special certificate.
Wow, a certificate.
Yeah, or like discounts at local stores as a reward for doing the responsible thing.
Yeah.
It's an active, fairly dramatic severing of ties with your driving life.
So it's almost treated like a retirement ceremony for your mobility.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Yoshida deliberately avoided that entire production. He points out that he didn't return his license. He simply made a quiet personal decision to not go through the next renewal process.
That's a massive psychological difference.
It really is. It's a passive stepping away.
Yeah.
He just let the license lapse, which perfectly aligns with his overarching theme, right?
Yeah.
The unfinished thoughts and transitional phases, no grand ceremonies, no final declarations, just a quiet shift.
I have to imagine the geography of where he was living played a huge part in making that quiet shift possible, though. Because at the time he turned 60 and let the license lapse, Yoshida was living in Tokyo.
Right. And living in Tokyo makes abandoning a car almost unnoticeable. It's arguably one of the most transit-connected cities on the planet. Public transportation is ubiquitous there.
Oh, totally. You have trains arriving every 3 minutes.
Buses weaving through every neighborhood.
Subway stations built literally into the basements of grocery stores.
Yeah, so letting a driver's license expire in central Tokyo doesn't really create any friction in your daily routine. Yoshida considers it a very good decision for his environment at the time.
But the narrative tension really starts to build when he moves, because he leaves Tokyo and relocates to what he describes as a regional city. How does that environment change the equation for him?
The reality of a regional city in Japan, and frankly, I mean, this applies to almost any suburban or rural town globally, is starkly different. In these areas, the infrastructure of daily life is built on the fundamental assumption of private vehicle ownership.
You have to have a car.
You do. Yoshida observes that having a car in this new environment suddenly makes life incredibly convenient.
Hmm.
You can just leave your house whenever you want without consulting some sparse bus schedule.
The source notes specifically mention the basic daily necessities, going out to buy groceries, getting to medical appointments at the hospital, running to the post
Right.
office. In places like this, daily life simply works, precisely because cars exist to bridge those geographic gaps.
And that sets up a profound internal conflict for anyone aging in that type of environment. You possess this 3,000-pound machine that makes your independent life possible, but you are also biologically getting older.
It's a tough reality to face.
It is. And Yoshida describes this tension beautifully. He says that despite the undeniable convenience of the vehicle, as people grow older, something small begins to appear.
It's that moment of pause he hints at in the title. You're going about your routine, tossing the groceries in the trunk, and then something catches your attention. He specifically mentions seeing news reports about tragic accidents involving elderly drivers.
And he clarifies that aging does not automatically equate to being a dangerous driver.
Right, of course not.
But the seed of doubt inevitably gets planted. Cars are incredibly powerful, convenient tools. But because of that kinetic power and the undeniable physical realities of aging, slower reaction times, changes in vision. A moment eventually arrives when we're forced to reconsider our relationship with the machine.
Which brings us to the practical dilemma. If you start feeling that pause, that hesitation about driving yourself, how do you actually get your groceries? How do you make it to the doctor?
Yeah, what's the alternative?
Here's where it gets really interesting. Yoshida examines the most obvious alternative, taking a taxi. But there's a massive psychological barrier to doing this, especially in regional towns.
In many of these regional areas, taxis carry a very distinct social stigma. They are perceived as something slightly special.
Like a luxury.
Exactly, they carry an aura of luxury.
Yeah.
You take a taxi to the airport for a big vacation, or you take one home after a fancy corporate dinner where you've had too much to drink.
Right.
Because of that cultural framing, they are generally viewed as an extravagant, expensive way to travel for just everyday chores.
I can completely see that. I mean, if you view a taxi as a luxury service, you're going to feel an immense amount of guilt calling one just to go buy a carton of milk and some eggs. You'll feel like you're throwing money away.
The baseline perception is that the private car in the driveway is economical and the taxi is an indulgence. But Yoshida brilliantly challenges this by shining a light on the invisible costs of that baseline.
The car in the driveway.
Yes. Maintaining a private car is far from free. It requires an ongoing, significant drain of resources.
He lists them out in the notes, and when you see them all together, it's actually a bit staggering. Taxes, monthly insurance premiums, state vehicle inspections, fuel, routine maintenance.
Just think about the pure dread of seeing the check engine light illuminate on your dashboard.
Oh, the worst. That light alone usually costs a few $100s just to turn off.
Exactly, and we just accept these massive financial burdens as the normal tax of existing in a modern society. We pay the insurance auto draft every month, we swipe our credit cards at the gas pump every week, and we absorb it into our routine without blinking.
We never calculate the amortized cost of the vehicle every single time we turn the key in the ignition.
No, we don't.
So let's actually do that math for the listener because it's a huge aha moment in the source material.
Okay, let's run the numbers. Let's say car ownership between insurance, gas, depreciation, taxes, and maintenance costs a conservative $5,000 to $6,000 a year.
Which is very conservative.
Very. Now, if you only really need to go to the grocery store twice a week, and maybe the hospital a couple times a month, what happens if you take a $15 or $20 taxi ride for those specific trips? That might cost you $1,500 or $2,000 a year.
You are actually losing thousands of dollars a year by letting that car sit in your driveway.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Yoshida's asking us to look past the emotional perception of the taxi as a luxury and look at the cold, hard financial reality.
The math flips completely.
It does. When you trade the constant, invisible bleed of car ownership for the transparent, on-demand cost of a taxi fare, the taxi stops looking like an indulgence. It starts looking like the hyper-efficient, economical choice.
But the transportation landscape isn't just traditional taxis anymore, is it?
Not at all.
Yoshida brings the technological shift we are currently living through right into this regional dilemma. He observes that ride-hailing applications are beginning to pop up in more and more places. And that introduces artificial intelligence into the ecosystem of how taxis move around cities.
And we really need to unpack how AI fundamentally changes the logistics here compared to a traditional taxi company. A traditional taxi service in a regional town is highly inefficient.
Because they have to manage the fleet.
Right. You have a centralized dispatcher sitting in an office, managing a fleet of cars that are often just idling at fixed taxi ranks near train stations waiting for a call.
Yeah.
That overhead is incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
And that keeps the fares high and the availability low.
So how do the AI-driven ride-hailing apps change that dynamic for the consumer in these regional areas?
Well, AI algorithms replace the dispatcher and the fixed taxi rank. The system uses predictive heat maps, dynamic routing, and real-time supply and demand matching.
It knows where you are before you even ask.
Essentially, yeah. It can predict where rides will be needed before they're requested, moving drivers efficiently through a sprawling regional city. This lowers the barrier to entry for local drivers who want to use their own cars, and it ultimately lowers the cost and wait time for the rider.
It makes summoning a ride as easy as tapping a glass screen. And what I appreciate so much about Yoshida's notes here is that he doesn't fall into the trap of tech utopianism. I mean, it would be incredibly easy for him to write an essay claiming that AI ride-hailing is going to swoop in and single-handedly save the elderly from the burdens of rural isolation.
He explicitly rejects that narrative. He states very clearly that he does not think AI will solve the grand problem of human transportation. It isn't a magical savior.
He sees right through the Silicon Valley marketing hype.
He really does. AI, in Yoshida's view, simply allows different options to exist. It just adds a new item to the menu of daily life.
Right, because before, your choices were pretty stark.
Very stark. You either drive yourself and absorb all the physical risks and financial costs, or you call a traditional expensive taxi and feel guilty about it. Now, this AI technology quietly appears alongside those old options, offering a middle path that might be more affordable or just more accessible.
It is a tool gently easing us through a transitional phase.
Easing is the perfect word for it. Giving up a car is incredibly hard because, for people who have driven for decades, the vehicle feels like an extension of their own body. It represents autonomy.
Total independence.
Yeah. But Yoshida's pointing out that with these new AI-driven options appearing, the transition away from driving doesn't have to be an all-or-nothing cliff you jump off.
It allows for a gradual distancing.
So much more manageable.
So, what does this all mean? How do we take Yoshida's deeply personal observations and apply them to the real world, especially when we're dealing with the people we love?
That's the real challenge, isn't it?
It is, because navigating this shift with an aging parent whose car is intimately tied to their sense of self-worth is a famously delicate, often explosive situation.
Yoshida's advice on this specific dynamic is profoundly compassionate and really practical. He suggests that we don't need sudden permanent closures. If there comes a moment to place a little distance between an aging driver and the act of driving, the key is the methodology of creating that distance.
Most families default to the dreaded Thanksgiving dinner intervention.
Oh, the worst approach possible.
Right. Everyone sits around the table, tensions are high, and someone finally says, "Dad, you're a danger on the road, we're taking the keys." Which, predictably, results in massive defensiveness.
Of course it does. When you corner someone and threaten their independence, their amygdala takes over. It becomes a pure fight-or-flight response.
So what does Yoshida offer as an alternative to the intervention?
He provides a tiny, brilliant script for anyone listening who has aging parents driving every day. He suggests you don't confront them at all.
No confrontation.
None. You just casually say to them, "I came across something interesting today."
That's it. Just, I came across something interesting today.
That is the entirety of the script. You just share an observation. You might casually mention the math breakdown we just did about the invisible cost of their car versus taking a ride share. Or you might mention a new AI ride-hailing app that just launched in their town.
You just drop the information into the room.
Without a single demand or expectation attached to it.
You aren't telling them what to do. You're just offering a piece of data.
This raises an important question. Why is this incredibly soft, almost passive approach so psychologically effective?
Why does it work better than the intervention?
Yoshida explains that this tiny phrase acts as a seed. It bypasses the defensive reflexes entirely. That small observation alone could spark a light conversation. And perhaps that conversation quietly becomes the starting point for them to evaluate their own transitional phase.
It allows them to maintain their total dignity.
Exactly.
They get to be the ones to look at the invisible costs, they get to look at the new tech options on their phone, and they get to make the choice on their own timeline.
It honors the idea of the unfinished thought that we talked about at the beginning.
Mhm.
You bring the concept up, you talk about it lightly, and you just leave it hovering in the air. You don't force a tearful conclusion right then and there.
You let the idea breathe and take root. The ultimate beauty of Yoshida's observation really is in its grace. He shows us that evaluating our changing lives, our physical aging, and the quiet, steady arrival of new technologies like AI doesn't require us to make drastic declarations.
We don't have to announce that an era is over.
We just need to maintain a quiet openness to new options as they appear alongside us.
It is a gentle reminder that society, technology, and our own biology are all constantly in a state of transition. Recognizing that takes an enormous amount of pressure off our shoulders.
It really does.
We don't have to have it all perfectly figured out today. We just have to be willing to occasionally reconsider our relationship with the tools we use to navigate the world.
As we wrap up this deep dive, we want you to take Yoshida's framework and apply it to your own life today. Think about his framing of the private car, the invisible taxes it extracts from us, financially and mentally, compared to the new, subtle options technology is rolling out. Look at your own daily tools and your own entrenched habits through this exact same lens.
It's a powerful way to audit your daily routines.
Definitely. So we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. If we accept the premise that we are currently living in a broader transitional phase shaped by artificial intelligence, how many other familiar everyday tools or habits are you clinging to out of pure routine?
That's a great question.
How many invisible taxes are those old habits extracting from your life right now, simply because you haven't paused long enough to notice the quiet, alternative options occurring right next to you? Take a look around. You might just come across something interesting today.